Hello, welcome to Timeless Teaches. I'm Sarah with Designs by Sarah J, and I'm here to help you make the simplest tote bag ever. Now, if you haven't done a lot of sewing, this project will build your confidence and give you the foundational tools so you can move on to other projects. Start by gathering some fabric. You can use one fabric for everything, or you can mix it up and make your interior and exterior of your bag different, and even make the straps different. For my project, I'm going to use this great focal print from the Queen Bee line from Timeless Treasures. I like to use a busy print on the outside of the bag because when you have a lot going on with the fabric, if you make any wobbles in your stitching, you're less likely to notice them. So grab a great print you love and let's use that for the exterior. For my interior, I'm going to use this coordinate from the Queen Bee line that has cute little bees in a grid pattern. This is going to be a light, bright interior so I can see things in my bag. And then for the straps, I plan to use this gray tonal print from the Surface collection. I like to use something for the straps that isn't directional. Then I don't have to worry about whether I've got things perfectly cut on a straight line where you might notice that with a stripe or something. So a tonal texture works great for the straps. Grab some other supplies. You need a thread that works with your fabrics. You can either use something that blends in or you can use a contrast. If you're a beginner, I recommend a thread that blends into your prints. Again, so you don't have to worry if you have any wobbles in stitching. You'll also need a rotary cutter, an acrylic ruler, and a mat. Then you may want to have an iron on hand to press out any wrinkles in your fabric, your sewing machine, and gather those essential supplies, and then we will get started with cutting, and let's make a bag. We're going to start with cutting the fabric for the straps. And so I've got my fabric folded so the selvages are together, and then I'm going to fold it one more time so I've got 4 layers of fabric here. And I'm going to line that fold up with the printed edge of the selvage and make sure that I've got a nice smooth surface. And our straps are going to be cut 4 inches wide. And so one thing that I like to do so that I have a nice neat edge to work with is figure out how far over I need to cut to get my 8 inches. So I'm going to allow about 9 inches. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I'm going to cut here. And I'm lining the markings on the ruler up with the edge of the fabric. Make sure that they're straight across there, so we'll have a straight edge here. And I'm just going to cut and pull this fabric aside. And now I'm going to rotate the mat so I can work against this straight edge. And now I will line up the 4-inch mark here on that straight cut edge. I'll cut. There's the first strap. And now we're ready to cut the second strap. And watch how I start my rotary cutter inside, not right here. If I start here and push, a lot of times this fabric's going to bunch up. So I'm going to put my rotary cutter here against the ruler, inside where I want to cut, pull back toward me, and then push away. And that prevents that bunch up, so I have a nice straight piece of fabric here. Now we'll move on to step 2, prepping the straps. So the first thing I want to do to prepare the strap is decide how long I want it. And strap length is a little bit personal preference. You want to make sure that you've got something that fits your height and your body type and works for the purpose you want. For this tote bag, I want it to go over my shoulder, so I'm going to want a strap that is about 34 inches long. And because this fabric is folded, I can then measure a 17-inch length and trim off the selvage edge, and that's going to give me a strap length that I like. So again, if I had this up against the edge of the mark, starting from 0, I could just read the 17 here, but instead I'm just going to count this off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And then I've layered both of these strips so that the end is aligned, and now I'm going to cut both of them at the same time, and that way I'll make sure both of my straps are the same length. And I can just discard that fabric or use it for scrap. And now we'll move on to how we prepare the straps to sew them so they'll be ready to add to our bag. We want our strap to look professional and have nice clean edges. So here's the way that we can accomplish that. First, I'm going to fold the strap fabric so right sides are facing out, wrong sides together, and I have this crease line, and I'm going to press that crease line in. And so I'm just going to work down the length of the strap, move this down, and I've now pressed in a crease along the whole length of that. I'm going to open this back up, and now I'm going to fold both edges to the inside and align the edge with that crease. And now I'm going to iron again. And if you set the iron down on the end and then just use your other hand to sort of fold these in, and if it's easier to just do one side at a time, that's fine. The iron gets hot, so you want to avoid burning yourself. And just press both of these fabrics in this manner so that you've got the raw edge facing in, lined up with that crease that you pressed. Once I've pressed both of the strips so that the raw edges are in toward that crease, I'm then going to fold it in half again and press one more time. And I'll do that down the length of both strips, and then that's going to give me a nice clean edged handle that I can attach to the bag when we're ready. So straps are ready to attach. Let's move on to cutting the body and the lining. So I have the exterior bag fabric and the interior fabric on my mat. They are both layered, so selvage to selvage. And if I layer them so that I'm cutting through all 4 layers at once, I find that that really helps me make sure I've cut both of my pieces the same size so everything fits together well. Most of us do not have large-scale cutting tables at home, so we have to work with the size of tools available to us. I'm cutting 20-inch squares, and because I know most folks don't have these oversized squares and mats at home, what I do is use the numbers on my mat to cut this out rather than a ruler that's 20 inches. And so I'm going to line up here to get a straight edge, and I'm just going to make that cut, pull away from me like I showed you before. And I didn't quite get it down here at the end. That's because my mat's really close to the edge of the table. So I'm going to pull that, and there we go. So I've got the first straight edge. And then I'll come over to the other side, cut again, and then I'll show you how I'm going to cut the rest of my shape out here with the 20 inches. So I've cut the 2 sides, and now I can rotate this. I've moved all 4 layers together, and I can put this now onto the 1-inch mark. That's going to give me a little idea, a little way to see the numbers more easily. And I've got both of the folded edges here to my right. I'm going to line up that straight edge with the 1-inch mark. And again, I just do a counting technique rather than lining up right against the edge. It gives me a little more maneuverability on my mat. So we're going to count. I want to make sure I trim off that selvage edge. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So right there is where I'm going to cut. Line it up on both ends. And then I'll trim the other edge, and then we'll be ready to talk about boxing corners. One of the tricks for making a tote bag by hand that looks professional is to give some stability to the bottom of the bag. And that essentially means creating a flat surface there. And the easiest way to do that is something called boxing the corners. Now, when I was first starting out with making tote bags, I found so many of the tutorials on this super confusing. And this method, I think, is the easiest one. It's fail-safe, so I recommend you try it and see if you like this method, because I've never had a problem when I box the corners like this. One thing to think about at this step is how you want your fabric to appear on the bag. And this is a directional fabric. It has text, so I want to be able to read the text upright. My little bee print here is directional as well. The bees are upright. So I've layered this so the text is going the correct way, and the bottom of my bag is where I'll box the corners. So this will put the bottom here. The text is facing right. Same with the bees. And so I've layered all 4 of these. And now I'm going to come in and I'm going to use my acrylic ruler and my rotary cutter, and I'm going to actually cut out a square on each of the 2 bottom sides. And this will look a little strange for now, but I'll show you how this makes all the magic of boxing corners simple. So I've got 2-inch and 2-inch, and I'm just going to trim that out. And I don't want to cut too deep in the fabric, so it's okay if you've got a thread or 2 there to trim when you make your cut. And same thing, I'm going to come over here for ease of the camera. Let me pull that up a little bit so you can see that. And so I'm going to cut this side as well. And I just don't like how the rotary cutter was laying there, so let's come around. You always want to make sure and think about safety, so I turn that so this faced a more comfortable direction, and there's the other 2-inch out. So this is what your the bottom of your bag looks like now. You've got these 2 corners cut out, and now we're going to start talking about assembly. Grab either a thread that matches your fabrics or something neutral. I like to have something that is a match of one of the colors in the prints, so it just kind of looks like part of the print. Again, I'm all about stress-free sewing and trying to help folks if they have wobbles or aren't confident. So pick a thread that matches your fabric, get your machine threaded and set up for a straight stitch, and we'll get to sewing. I've layered the exterior fabrics for the bag right sides together, and I put in a couple of pins along the long edges to help make sure everything stays aligned when I sew. And what we're going to do now is sew along the 2 long edges that are the sides of the bag, and then along the bottom. We're not going to sew this corner right now. I'm going to use a 1/2-inch seam allowance, and for me, my plate here on my sewing machine has markings to indicate different widths of seam allowance from the needle. And so I've got the 1/2-inch there. I'll put the fabric under the needle, make sure everything's lined up nice and straight. We're under the needle. I'm aligned with that 1/2-inch mark, and I can just start sewing. And so I'll sew down both edges and the bottom, and then we'll be back to talk about boxing the bottom corner. So we're ready to talk about that bottom edge. And remember, I told you there are a lot of ways to box a corner, and this is truly the simplest I ever found. You don't have to worry about finding 45-degree angles on your ruler or marking or stitching. So we have that cut out, and what we're going to do is grab the 2 pieces of fabric, the opposite sides, and then we're going to line up where that stitch line is and push your seam allowance on one side to the right, on one side to the left. I'm going to drop a pin in there and just poke it through both of those seam allowances, and then I can straighten this out a little bit, And I'm going to use something called a fork pin, and as you can see, it has tines on either side, and I'm going to run that in on either side of the pin that lined up the stitch line. And now I've got that nice and flat, and I can put this under my presser foot, raise the needle. I'm going to pull this little scrap out of the way. That helps keeps my threads from balling up on the bottom. And again, I'm going to go in here with the 1/2 inch seam allowance lined up on the 1/2 inch line, and I'm just going to stitch this down. And because this is the corner in the bottom, I've started stitching. I'm going to reverse stitch just to lock that in. Run down here to the opposite edge. When I get close to that pin, I'm going to pull it out. Run down and get close, and I'm going to reverse stitch again just to give a little more stability. And then I have got that done, and we will trim our threads, and let me show you what this looks like. So look at that. When we turn this inside out, we're going to have a nice bottom. It's going to be about 4 inches wide because we cut a 2-inch corner on either side. So repeat this process for the opposite corner of the exterior and then for the lining, and then we'll start talking about assembling our bag. We're ready to start sewing, and the first thing I'm going to do is finish the edges of the straps so they look crisp and professional. I've got my stitch set to about 2.3. I've threaded with a neutral gray because I've got a lot of gray in these prints, and I'm using a presser foot where I can run the edge of the fabric along that interior edge and end up with about 1/8 of an inch seam, which is what will give me a nice professional top stitch type look here. And so I'm just going to start stitching. I'm going to visually keep the edge of that strip against the interior edge of the presser foot. And I'll do this down both edges of the strips so that both sides are sewn down. And then we'll be ready to move on to sewing the interior and exterior of the bag. I just wanted to give you a quick peek at the finished stitched straps. As you can see, the stitching runs along both edges, and that just gives it a nice professional look, as I mentioned. So let's move on to sewing the lining and the exterior of the bag, and then we can move on to assembly. We are ready now to insert the straps and sew the final piece of the tote bag together. I have the strap here. I'm going to hold it, make sure that I don't have anything twisted, and then I'm actually going to set it inside, in between the exterior of the bag and the interior. And I'm going to position it so that each strap is about 4 inches from that edge that we sewed. And here's the seam line of the edge, just for a reminder. And I want to make sure that those two seams are lined up, so I'm going to anchor that with one of my fork pins. And then measure 1, 2, 3, 4. Lay the strap there, and again, it's inside, in between the lining and the exterior of the bag. And I'm just going to put a pin there to hold it in place. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Count 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to pin that. And I've got the edge here where that stitch line is all lined up as well. Put a pin in just to hold that. And you could go through now if you wanted and put in a few pins just to help keep your edges together. Do that on this other side as well. And then we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to move this pin to the outside just because it's easier to pull those out. If it's where I can easily see it. And so we're going to move to the machine now. We're going to sew starting and stopping and leaving an opening. So I'm going to start close to one of these straps, and you'll see when we start sewing. So all the way around, and then I'm going to stop about here where that pin is, and then I'll be able to turn this inside out through that opening. So let's go sew. So we've sewed all the way around. I've left this little opening here, and what we're going to do now is reach inside and pull this inside out, and you just kind of work it through. And you can see that we're starting to see the shape of the bag come together, and I'll show you how we finish this off in the next step. Okay, we have turned the bag inside out now through the opening. We have this little opening here that we use for turning that we now need to close. And in doing that, we're going to just do another little edge stitch around the whole perimeter here of the bag. That's also going to help give it a finished look. It will reinforce the straps. I'm putting a couple of pins in here just to make sure that where that opening is stays nice and aligned. And I want to make sure that I put this under the presser foot so that the back of the bag is not getting caught. And I'm also going to want to make sure that I don't do something weird with my straps. So get ready to sew. Pull the strap out of the way there. And I'm going to again do like I did for stitching the straps with that edge stitch. I'm going to line up the edge of the tote here with this inner edge of my presser foot, and so that's going to just stitch right here along the very edge and make this look very professional. So I'll have a nice finished project, and I'm just going to stitch. I'm going to do a couple of back stitches here at the beginning to lock that in, and then I'm just going to continue stitching all the way around the entire top of the tote. And I'll show you that as I get close to the strap, I just make sure the strap's laying flat. And it just stitches right up. And so we'll do that all the way across, and then I'll come back and show you the finished product. So here we are. We have a finished tote bag. The straps are on, they fit over my shoulder nicely, so this is kind of where I like to carry a tote. As you can see, we have a little width to the bag because we boxed those corners like I showed you. Now this is a really lightweight tote. It's great to just throw over your shoulder and carry a few things if you're running an errand or something. We have a whole series planned here with Timeless Teaches where we're going to get into even more intricate totes, things with pockets and zippers, lining, a sturdier project. So if you want to use this to carry groceries, we'll show you how to make something that's sturdier. We have lots of fun planned here at Timeless Treasures in this program. So I hope you'll stay tuned and watch for even more great projects with Timeless Teaches. Thanks so much.